Hi there, fellow loom knitters. Today we're going to focus in on increasing in the round. That's right, you heard me. We're going to increase in the round. Very exciting. This technique is going to revolutionize the way we loom knit. Not only is it going to change the way we think about loom knitting, but how we approach our designs as well. So all you loom knit hat designers, buckle up. This is going to be a good one. So today's increases that we're going to focus in on can't be done on the traditional loom. We've been using these looms for years and I haven't figured out how to increase in this one. However, when we use these new looms or newer looms, they've been around for a few years now. This is a Flexee loom made by KB Looms. This loom is revolutionary. It is a game changer, folks. Absolutely very exciting. So today I'm going to show you how to create the increases. I'm going to show you the tools that we need to do the increases, when to use those tools, and why I've chosen those tools for that job. Plus, I'm going to share with you a few tips and tricks that I've learned along the way in an effort to keep your curse quotient down. Mine's too high. I'm way beyond help, but here's hoping that yours stays lower. For this video, I've divided my loom into 6 different parts, and that's for 6 different increases. You'll notice that I've also divided it by color, and that's just to make it easier for me. It acts as a prompt as I go along when I'm producing my increases. Now, there are several steps to the increase, and I highly recommend watching the video all the way through and then just coming back for any of the tricky bits. As for the other tools that I mentioned, we'll look at those as we go. So let's get started. So here we are at our loom. As you can see, I've done a few rows off camera. One of the first tips I'd like to share with you is that I usually take 6 or however many increases I'm doing in the round, and I set aside those pegs right away. That way I take from those pegs, and that way I make sure that I capture all, in this case, 6 increases. So you can see I've got 6 light and 6 dark pegs, and they will go in each section respectively. As I insert my pegs for the increase, this is the cable needle that I prefer. Cable needles come in various sizes and shapes, and this is the particular shape that I enjoy when I insert, because you'll notice that each end is pointed and it's got this dip in the center, and you'll see how I use that as we go along. So the first thing I do when I insert a link is I search for 2 looser stitches that straddle 2 links, because I'm going to remove those 2 stitches and place them onto that cable needle, and I'm going to put them in the back out of my way. Then I'm going to separate those 2 links and insert another link, and these are my 2 pegs that you can see. I'm not going to connect the link completely because this will allow me a little bit more wiggle room. I'm going to remove 1 stitch at a time and replace them onto that new link. And once that's done, then I'm going to connect that new link to the entire round. And you'll notice that now there's an empty link on either side of that new link, or there's an empty peg rather on either side of that new link. I'm going to now shift those stitches so that that empty peg is on either end next to the base pair. Now you can see there's an empty peg on either end of this section right next to the new base pair. This is step 2 of the increase process. I have shifted all of those stitches towards the center. So at this point in time, I have already completed all the link insertions and shifted the empty pegs to be next to on either side of the base pair. The base pair is what I consider where the two different colors meet, and that's why I use it as a prompt. So now I've got an empty peg next to on either side of the base pair. Some of the tools that I use for the next step are some sharp angled cable needles. And you'll notice this particular cable needle has got a point on the ends, and that's particularly helpful because some of these are stitch holders here, and they also, my preferred one is to have a point on them too. But you have to be careful because some of the stitch holders don't have a pointed edge. They actually have a blunt, flat edge, and you can see where the smaller one here has that flat edge, and it can sometimes split the yarn. The sharper angles also make it easier to manipulate later on. In addition, I use crochet hooks, something small that's going to fit in between the two pegs easily and not catch. I prefer a 3 or a 4 millimeter. A 5 is just a little bit too big. At this point in time, I'm now prepared to prep the base pair. So because I knit in a clockwise direction, my first peg is considered the light peg, and my second peg is considered the dark peg. If I were to knit in a counterclockwise direction, the first peg would be the dark peg, and the second peg would be the light peg. Doesn't matter which direction you knit in, as long as you knit the first peg as the first peg and the second peg as the second peg, it's all good. Another thing that I've noticed for myself is that it's easier for me to prepare the second peg in before I do the first peg. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to take the stitch behind the second peg and I'm going to give it a good tug and create a gap there. I'm going to put a stitch holder and hold that stitch in back and keep it in the back. You can see how because this stitch holder is longer, it's easier to manipulate. And now I'm going to take that first peg and grab that stitch from behind and stretch it over to the empty peg adjacent. So now I've created a new stitch on that what once was an empty peg. And now I'm going to just keep that stitch marker there, and as I knit, we'll process it. So let me just knit that first new peg in my regular stitch. In my case, it's an E-wrap, whatever stitch I'm using in the center section. So I'm going to knit that one over. And now for this first peg of the base pair, I'm going to knit a U-wrap for these two pegs here. So there's a U-wrap there, and that's my first peg. And here's a U-wrap on the second peg. And now you can see why I had to mark off that stitch, because I've just added a new stitch behind, and now it makes it easier for me to distinguish between them. So now I'm going to grab this stitch holder and give it a good tug so that I can create a gap. Taking my small crochet hook, I'm going to put it through the gap, and I'm going to pull the working yarn back through. Doesn't matter which direction I grab the working yarn, I'm going to just pull it through and create a new loop. That new loop is going to be now placed onto the second empty peg that's adjacent to that other peg. I can remove my stitch holder. I'm done with that now. And now I'm going to E-wrap the next peg. I'm not going to E-wrap that new link, that new peg, because it's done. It's finished. I don't have to touch it anymore. Now I'm going to continue on my merry way. In my case, it's an E-wrap along to the next base pair. and I've just created 2 new stitches, one on either side of that base pair. So there's my increase. Ta-da! One of the things that I've learned is that it's much faster for me if I prepare the base pairs. So I'll mark that second peg, and that first peg I will grab from behind and put it onto the empty peg adjacent, knit the empty or the now new stitch as I normally would, and then I would U-wrap that first peg, U-wrap the second peg, tug on the stitch marker, creating a gap, grab my crochet hook, squeeze it through, pull through, making a new loop, put it on the second empty peg. That one's done now. I can move on, get rid of the stitch marker, and move on with whatever pattern that I'm using. That's the fastest way that I have learned, and it keeps me in a flow state. So I took the time to cast off the swatch, and I've only just stretched it out just to show you what it looks like, because if it were blocked, these upper sections here would resemble much more of these together stitches down below. But what I wanted to point out was this was the E-wrap section, and could be any stitch that you choose in here. These are the U-wrap seams. So these are the base pairs that you see here. And as I said, I only just tugged at it and whatnot to give you an idea. So this is in its most raw and basic form. Obviously, once it's blocked, it's going to look a lot better than this. But this is the technique. And I'm just so excited that we can now increase in the round. Yes! So just as a recap, today we focused in on increasing in the round. We learned about the tools that we needed to make such an increase, when to use them, and why we chose those particular tools. I also just want to remind you that regardless of the direction that you knit in, the first peg you encounter is considered the first peg, and by default, the second peg you encounter is considered the second peg. Hello! So as long as you knit them and work them accordingly, you won't have any issues at all. Another thing that I did talk about was tips and tricks that I was going to share with you. And let's just go over those quickly. The first thing I do when I'm increasing is I'll put aside all of the links that I need to increase. That way I know I'm going to capture all of the links and I'm not going to miss any. Another tip that I would like to share is as I go around, there were several steps to the increase, but I tend to lump a couple of them together. So when I insert a link, I will also shimmy all of the other empty pegs along so that the empty pegs are right next to the base pair. Then I will mark off the second peg and move the first peg over. So I've joined those two. And then when I'm ready to actually knit and make the increase, it's now more like an assembly line, and I'm in a much more, I think they call it a flow state. So I'm moving. I'm totally motoring when I'm actually knitting and making the increases. So that makes things a lot easier too. A final tip that I learned was that for the base pairs, yes, you can do other stitches, but I highly recommend sticking with just the U-wrap. The U-wrap made it a lot easier for me to pick out that second peg and mark the stitch from behind, and also move over on the first peg. The U-wrap was a cleaner stitch as well once it was done. So I would say for flexibility, ease, I guess, and also neatness, I would highly recommend the U-wrap for the base pair. Everything else in between is totally up for grabs, so go for it. Now, these are the tips that I've learned along the way, and I'm sure once you get started, you're going to be creating your own tips, which I would be very interested in hearing about. So by all means, leave them in the comments below and share with the Flexee Loom You can do increases on anything that you make in the round. So that's bell sleeves. You can now have a bell sleeve. You can do your own bell bottoms, so your leg warmers can flare out. Also, and of course, for all you hat designers out there, now you can do a top-down hat, and you can start with as few as 4 links. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is possible. So I'll leave those designs up to you. And if you don't have your own Flexee Loom just yet, take a look at the affiliated link below. It's a game changer, folks. Definitely worth your time to pick up a Flexee Loom. Oh my gosh. So if you found this video helpful at all, by all means, please like and subscribe and leave a comment with a tip or two. That'd be great. Share with everybody. So until next time, I'm Stacey from Stitches by Stacey, wishing you the focus to deliberately learn something new and the confidence to implement what you've learned. Thanks for watching.